What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Scratch Agency podcast, hosted by Scratch Agents for Scratch Agents. My name is Stephen Turnbull, founder of T5 Insurance Services in Utica, New York. I'm joined by my co-host today, the one and only Mr. Shawn Fitzgerald, founder of LAF Advisors in Long Island, New York. Shawn, how are we doing today, sir?
Dude, I'm doing great. You got to tell us about that one-year T5 party you have going on. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, dude, man, we're 11 months in. Actually, today is 11 months since I left my family agency and started T5. Awesome. So that's pretty crazy. April 13th. But yeah, we're gonna have a little one-year celebration. Left the family business, and there was a lot going on, so there wasn't a big ribbon-cutting hoo-ha opening party. Let's just put it that way. And so thought, why don't we have a one-year party? And we're going to, we're really community-focused with T5. Everything's referral-based, do a lot with Rotary Club and stuff like that. So we're going to make it a food drive as well. So we partnered up with another business that does a lot of work for collecting food for veterans in the area. And I think it's kind of a unique opportunity because everybody just thinks of those around the holidays, right? Everyone thinks about food drives when it comes to Thanksgiving, Christmas. So we're going to tie that in and have a one-year party, and everyone gets first drink, Shawn. So if you want to make the drive, first drink's on me. I'll even buy your drinks all night if you drive up.
5 hours for one free drink. All right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one free drink. Just, yeah.
There you go.
That's the draft. Make sure it's the draft beer only. We're only 1 year in business. Okay.
All right.
None of the hard stuff.
It's the company you're driving up for, Shawn.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
No, so it'll be fun. We got that coming up next May, so we'll report back on it. I appreciate you bringing that up. But yeah, 1 year in. Feels like 10 years. Feel like I've aged 100 years, but it's all good. A lot of learning and a lot of good stuff that's happened. But super excited to have our guest on today, everybody. We have Elliot Bassett. He's the president and partner at Ellerbrock-Norris. He's also the host of Getting Past the Premium podcast. He's got a nice project called Launch going on. We got a lot to dive into today. So, Elliot, thank you very much for joining us. I know we had to reschedule you because we had a little internet issue on my end. So I appreciate you being flexible with that, and welcome to the Scratch Agency podcast. How are you today?
Good, guys. Thank you very much for having me on. It's going to be fun, and I enjoyed our last conversation, Stephen, on GPP, so looking forward to this one.
So why don't you introduce yourself, just how you got in the industry, the classic introduction here for people who may be meeting you for the first time, and then we can get into what we want to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So our firm was started in 1906 in Hastings, Nebraska. So a lot of history in Nebraska. We kind of really grew in the 70s, 80s, 90s. My father took over as the CEO in the 90s, and so that's how I got kind of introduced to the industry. Started right out of college, as green as could be. Didn't really know what I was getting into, but didn't have another job, and Dad's like, "Hey, come work for me." So we started it out, and but got in, loved it. Like everybody says, didn't know what I was getting into, and love the industry, love what we can do for our clients, and love that we're all in the same industry, but we can all do things differently, and that's what's a blast, having these conversations and things. And so started in 2010, and I've done a lot of different things since then, but working to transition the company and things that I'm sure we can talk about. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it and got going.
So was it always the plan for you? Because, I came from a long history legacy business, and everybody asked that same question. And for me, obviously the plans got changed a little bit when I started T5, but was it always the plan for you to be in the business? Did you work in there in high school? Was it always the plan, or were you trying to shy away from it?
You could say I worked here like middle school through high school because I cleaned on the weekends, but other than that, no. And my dad never really pushed, so my younger brother works with us as well, never really pushed us into the business, but we saw a lot of what he was doing, and what and how his lifestyle was, and how hard he worked and things like that. And I think that just kind of instilled at least the perception of the industry in us. And so, I got to senior year of college in 2010, and, it wasn't like a great job economy at that point. And it was something I knew I was interested in. Maybe further down the road, I might, think about it, and just decided, I was playing in golf league with him that summer because I was back home, and said, might be something I'm interested in. And he said, well, we can figure it out. So that's kind of where we started. So no, it wasn't something that at that point, it wasn't even designed to be a family company. When we still have other partners in the firm, but that's kind of shifted with where my dad's vision of the company and the legacy and things have gone to, where we will always have and want to bring on new and other partners to the firm, but we'll remain kind of that legacy family owned, majority owned run company. Go ahead.
And Elliot, when you first started at that agency, did you start off as a producer, or what was your position there?
Yep. So started off as a producer, but kind of a do all things. So I learned personal lines, learned small commercial, learned commercial, even down to the service work, just to get a good foundation. So spent a lot of time doing all those different roles, and but was hired to be a producer and in sales. Yep.
I think there's a lot that I started the same exact way, not exactly having a niche, and I did a little personal, a little commercial, a little life. We were just talking about this on the last episode. And but what I think is also super important is what you said, is doing a lot of service work, which a lot of people say that's not good for a producer to be doing. But I would argue, depending on where you're at your stage in your life, like I was 21, learning that service work. If I didn't know all that service work, there's no way I would have been able to open up my own agency or been able to train other people how to do certificates of insurance or how to handle this renewal process or whatever the case is. So 100%. I just think that's a good thing to add,
Well, it's changed, man. Like the industry has changed now, where it's like we want immediate results, right? And we're even battling this now when we hire new producers that are inexperienced, and even particularly maybe they're younger and experienced in business, right? They haven't had a job for that long. And it is tough because, they need a 5-year runway. And if you're doing it right, yes, you would like them to do all those things. And we're trying different things and, trying to figure it out. But it is hard because, you look at, if you're not validated by 3 years, you're gone type of thing. And it's tough. It's a tough industry to learn. And I don't care how book smart you can get. That's not how it plays out in the real world. You have to get experience. And so I think that producer training, onboarding, validation, whatever terms you want to use, is going to be ever more important moving forward, because we're going to have to recruit to the industry and we're going to have to train them.
There's so much power to it in saying, I've been here, I've done this. You're not passing off a task that you haven't lived in it. You're not passing off a responsibility that you haven't taken on at some point. So I think, that's powerful too, especially when you're growing your team, to your point, recruiting, bringing people on. You can share your own experiences or whatever it might be along that. Sorry, Shawn, I know I cut you off there a little bit.
No. I was just gonna build off what he was saying with the producer onboarding and training. I think that is a big part of it. You need to, especially as a leader, you need to be able to project the vision of what their career path should look like. And I mean, I'm sure everyone does it a little bit different way, but I mean, the way I did it is an old-fashioned Excel sheet. Hey, this is what year one could look like with your cut if doing these specific tasks, showing the clear path on how to do it. I think it also motivates them when they see it and they start to realize more, wow, this is a long game, and if I stick this out for 5, 10 plus years, like you said, you're going to be living a real comfortable life, So absolutely. I just think the producer training is a really good thing to touch on. Elliot, tell me too. So you start off as a producer, right? You're writing some business. At that point, what is the agency size at? What is the agency makeup? What does it look like at that point?
Yeah, so we were, you are testing me here. We were probably at that point when I started, probably 20 to 25 people across the firm. We had 4 locations, but most of them were, relatively small. We had a couple of people here in Omaha and whatnot. But yeah, so I think we were right around that 20, 25 people. We were like $2.5 million in revenue when I started. And we pretty much only did property casualty. We had a couple kind of more 1099 folks that would do some health as it came up and things, but primarily 98% of our revenue was P&C.
And so let's fast forward to today. What does the agency look like now? What's the firm set up compared to when you started there?
Yeah, so we're about 55, 60 people now, still 4 locations. We now have 4 distinct divisions of the company. So we have our P&C commercial, which includes personal and commercial, I guess. We have our benefits, health and wellness division, which is health, life, ancillary, all that. We have a wealth strategies division, which is an independent RIA. wealth management, et cetera, et cetera. One cool things we're doing there is like perpetuation planning and exit planning for businesses, which we're pretty passionate about. And then we have a business solutions division, which we've got some unique solutions there, like a safety network and some other kind of consulting, I guess, that we could do. That's kind of our catch-all for some other things. And then we'll probably hit 10 to 11 million of revenue this year, is what we're projecting. So
it's awesome.
Hopefully,
good for you, man. That's great.
But, it's been a fun ride. Good.
How many producers do you have?
12, I want to say. I'd have to count real quick, but
yeah.
I know. Just like you and I, Shawn. Same thing. Yeah, same setup.
Tomato.
No, one thing.
Go
ahead. You go ahead. All right. No, one thing I thought was interesting about bringing you on, Elliot, is you just recently took over as president, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And, I wanted to talk through if there's been any things where, okay, now that I'm driving this ship, here's the things that we're doing. But you just talked about when you started, you were like 2.5 million in revenue. Now you're looking at 10, 11 or whatever it is. You've added on all those different aspects of the business, added on different lines, different concentrations and focuses. Let's walk through that and dive a little deeper into that if we can. Were most of those things and ideas that you brought on, were they, you found somebody in the community that they're really good at this one thing, we want to bring them in to grow? Because I think as the large firm that you are compared to, let's call myself, where it's me, myself, and I right now bootstrapping this thing, there's so many similarities still there, right? From bringing on maybe the 50th employee to bringing on the first employee, or bringing on a different line of business. And so walk us through maybe that, if you can, that evolution, maybe some of the things you brought on and difficult things you faced, or let's
100%,
talk about that.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't start in your shoes. I mean, I have a lot of respect for you and anybody else out there that's starting from scratch, because I think that's a whole different set of challenges. But I will say, like, one of the things that I think when we really took kind of the turn and really started to grow and kind of dial it in a little bit was, and we just talked to Brett Young about this, if you're familiar with him down at Urban Young, but they talk a lot about on their podcast as well about building a business, not building an agency, which are two very different things, right? And we were certainly, when I was brought on, we had, I don't know how many producers at the time, 4 or 5, but they were all books of business, right? And the producer kind of ran their own book, and we had a service team behind them, and it was just kind of everybody did their own thing, like, hey, go out and grow and see what you can do this year. And so, that was how I was brought in, and that's how we operated for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And we had, decent growth, but it really wasn't a business that was charging towards the same vision with consistent methodology. If you went, one of my dad's clients to one of Ben Kohler's clients, they're in the same office, and that client would probably describe something completely different as to their experience, right? That's not scalable. We can't grow. Like, eventually we're going to run into a ceiling with that, right? It is doable for a while. Like, you make your first couple hires, and, you can't sometimes build all of that out at once. But I think it's important as you're looking to grow, especially from scratch, is have that guiding star that you're shooting for, because that's going to dictate your decisions, how and when it's going to be able to hire the next person and say, hey, here's where we're going. I don't have it all figured out yet, but we want to get there, right? And I think that's super important. And I think a lot of, because our industry, right, everybody has to have it. It's a product they have to buy. And there's a lot of opportunity from a carrier perspective, different solutions you can sell. So you can be successful by just kind of going out and doing it. But you'll run into, at some point, problems with that model. And so that'd be the biggest thing I can look back, is once we kind of made that decision that we're going to bring this thing together, all in alignment, all under one banner, all under, one vision, is when we really saw the ability to scale. And that comes with change. Like, we've had folks that, didn't want to change and loved what they were doing. And, we've had to make some of those hard decisions, or they've had, they've taken other roles and whatnot. And that's okay, because things are evolving and it's changing, and that's all right. But I can literally point back to that being the single probably biggest thing to a lot of the growth that we've had.
Oh, have you ever read The Energy Bus?
Yeah.
Love that book.
Good book.
I try to read that. I mean, I try to read that twice a year.
Yeah, it's one I should go back and reread, actually. It's good.
And the best part about it is it's such a simple read. At some points during the book, you think you're reading a children's book, but the message is so strong. And It's just about like, it's okay that if you're going to make this decision as a leader to do X, Y, and Z, and Mary has always been on the bus, but her seat's changing and she doesn't want to move seats, get on the bus or get off. And it talks about how to empower your team. And everything you said right there just reminded me of that. So I asked that question because I'm sure you have read it in the past, because there was a lot there.
Well, with that being said, you always treat people fairly. You always treat people with respect. But at the end of the day, if they're not aligned with that vision, they're not going to be comfortable either. They're not going to want to keep doing, but they maybe don't know that they could be somewhere else happier, in a role that is better suited for them. It's hard for that person to understand that, right? They've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. And those are the hard ones, frankly. And, but you do get energy from being excited about something when you find it, but we've had to do a lot of that. Good.
Yeah, no, I was just going to touch on something you said too, which I think is really important, and a struggle I had in the beginning from going to a producer to a business owner. When I first opened, full transparency, when I first opened this agency, I did not look at it like a business. I just was like, oh, I'm a good producer. I'll just go out and write a bunch of business. I mean, it's the only thing I could do at the time, but
you almost have to look at it that way for a period of time, right? You gotta bring on business. You do. But I think if I had the mindset of systematizing everything from the beginning, I would be in a little bit of a better position now, because my team would have hit the ground running, so to speak. You know what I mean? So, and the book, The E-Myth, does a great job of like explaining the difference between like a technician and a business owner, and having like that almost like a franchise model where everything is system and process based, Yep. So I just thought that was super important. And what would your advice be? Because I mean, you have, good God, 55, 60 people, as Stephen would say. He can't even manage himself.
Thank you.
What advice would you give to a scratch agent that is just starting to build a team to systemize everything? Like what kind of advice would you give there?
Yeah. I think if you're just starting a team, I'd say two things. I'd say hire for culture, hire for the culture you want to build, the type of personality you want to be with every single day. Don't necessarily get caught up in, say you're hiring a producer that, they can come in and write $150,000 a year or whatever, and they're not a right fit, because I guarantee you in 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to be in a position that you don't want to be in with that person. So hire for fit first, for sure. And fit being not just like, I like working with you, like you get excited by the mission that I am putting in front of you. This is what we're going to do. Does that get you excited and out of bed every morning? And if it does, like, we can go pretty cool places. So I think that's first and foremost. But then, and this is actually something that I heard recently that I really liked, and I can equate it to a lot of the things we do, or have done, but hire doers first. So don't necessarily it's going to be tempting. You get a small team built to hire like a manager or hire somebody to do those things. And those are sometimes, if you don't do those right, are going to slow you down, because you have to train that person, and they got to build systems, and then, which you want all those things built, but you want them for the doers, and get that foundation of doers built, whether that's producer, service team, et cetera, et cetera. And then go and at the appropriate time, layer on management and things as you need it. Because you can have a decent team if you got the right people, before you've got to kind of hire those non-revenue producing or doing roles, I guess. And that's not to say that those management roles aren't doing things, obviously, but it's, as a small firm, be very cognizant of where you're putting your resources. And, you can get pretty far if you get the right people on the team to start.
So I assume that you didn't just get thrown into the president's role and your dad said, see you later. And, I'm assuming there was maybe a grooming to that, but I am also sure that there's things that maybe you didn't realize now being the president, or things that have come up as a surprise or whatever. I'm interested is in the grooming process, and now being the president of a large firm like that. What are some things from a leadership standpoint that you learned about yourself that maybe was a little bit different from being just the producer or manager or whatever the role was you haven't had in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I still feel like I learn new things every day. But I think, the biggest thing is And I don't know how to necessarily put it into words, but it's about truly caring about your team and who they are as people and how do they develop as people. Making them better as individuals is always going to give you a far better return business-wise than you're ever going to be able to quantify. And, it's easy coming up in that producer rank and not kind of overseeing people and not being responsible for their development to see metrics and to see, the hard numbers and things like that. It's really thinking through each person's situation, which is always different. It's always easy to look at, well, so-and-so's not, they're only doing 85% of whatever metric. And it's like, well, what's going on that's causing that, and how can we help support them? And kind of shifting that mindset away from like, I don't know if it's playing the blame game or whatever, to how can we support that person to getting better? And once we've done everything we can to support them, at that point we've got to have the conversation, is this the right fit? But I always tell our team, like, don't even bring that conversation to me until you can say, I've done everything I can, and I'm probably going to ask you to do it again. Just because we want to make sure that we're giving the resources appropriate to that person to make them successful.
You touched on something there, saying how can we support them? I think one of the biggest things that people miss the mark of is just simply putting yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, totally agree.
Sitting down and just looking at you as the leader, trying to look at yourself. And I think most of it's an ego problem, probably, right? But to sit down and say, or just simply reevaluating your team, like we were talking about earlier, to put yourself in their shoes and say, if I was in this position, if this was my role at the agency, at the business, whatever it is, what would I like? What would be better for me to do my job? And leading with those conversations. We have a friend that is a similar situation where he's taking over a family agency. It's about, I think, 11 or 12 people. And now he's starting to have these conversations and, learning a lot from that experience of just how powerful sitting down and simply having a conversation with a staff member, with a team member can be. And just, I think it's interesting too, because it also is the same thing when you're sitting down with a client, right?
Yeah.
Or a new prospect. What's your pain points? How can I help? It's the 100%. Same. It's the same type of conversation.
Well, and I would add even something to that is like, it's easy in business to think, well, you've got to leave your personal life at the door, right? And come in and work and do business. And it's like, in what world does that actually work? Like, if somebody's going through a divorce, or if they have a sick kid, or if they have whatever going on in their personal life, you can't just be like, hey, leave that at the door, come in, and do your job. Like, no, it doesn't work. We're human beings here. And I think it's just super important for all of us to say, like, okay, somebody had a bad week. Like, instead of going and saying you had a bad week, be like, hey, what's going on, Steven? Like something up, or what can we do to help? It's a completely different mindset in a business owner or a leader capacity, because it's very easy that's a harder thing to do. It takes more time. It takes more effort than just, hey, you're not getting your shit done. And you're not getting your stuff done, and, come back next week with a better attitude, kind of thing.
I think the biggest thing there is communication.
Yeah.
Just communicating, setting that expectation, which we, again, talk about a lot from the client standpoint, but setting the expectation of like, hey, Sally, if you have a problem, approach me this way. Like, this is how we want to be able to communicate. Sorry, Shawn, go ahead.
No, you stole the words. You stole the words out of my mouth. I was actually going to ask Elliot, because of how big your team is, and I just think right now I have 2 people, right? And the 2 people I talk to multiple times a day, so I kind of know what's going on in their life. I can keep up with them, all that fun stuff. But as your team grows, even to 10, 11, 12 plus people, I would have to imagine it gets hard to try to figure out, do I meet with them monthly, quarterly, annually? Like, what's the best way to handle that? Because, and we've talked about this prior too, and I just think of myself in the past, your wants and needs change on an annual basis, right? So one year I might be all, for 5 years, I might be all about money. I gotta build up my finances. And then I have a couple kids and I'm like, all right, now my priority is I want to spend some time with my kids. So I'd rather have a little extra time off. It could be so different depending on where you're at with life. And I think that's why it is important to have those frequent conversations with your team, because that's just going to build the culture you want. But I'm curious from your standpoint, Elliot, for how big the team is, how do you guys kind of manage what's going on? Do you do like annual meetings? Is it managers for a certain amount of people? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, good question. So a couple things in there. I mean, we obviously have like mid-level managers and team leaders. We've optimized that over time based on number of people that are reporting to you and things, because there can be span of control things and whatnot. And gotcha. That I think is a little bit of figuring out what works for you. But I will say the best way that we found to kind of manage that team, let's say, and really stay in touch with them and understand what's going on is, number one, short answer is ask them, right? Have a conversation, ask them how their life is going, things like that. But we've kind of systematized that, and there's a good book, I'm going to forget the name of, by Larry Linney. I'll find it. I could send it to you afterwards. But they wrote a book on the concept of reverse performance management. So this is the model that we use internally. And the theory behind it is you meet with that person, and obviously you have, for their position, you have certain, not metrics. There could be metric driven things that you have to meet, but it's the behavioral side of it, right? Like, how are they doing their job and things that you'll want to put goals around. And here's what our expectations are of this role in 4 or 5 categories. But then on a monthly basis, or you could do it quarterly or whatever cadence you want. I would recommend it at least monthly or quarterly. But then you just sit down with a quick 15-minute conversation. And the reason it can be 15 minutes is because they come prepared to have already evaluated their performance over the last month in those areas. That's why it's called reverse performance management. So then you as a leader, you're obviously going to have your, thoughts around how they did, and, you'll have the metrics and things or whatever. But the whole conversation is around, tell me how you feel like you're doing. Tell me how you're doing. Tell me, and provide examples, provide evidence. If you think you did great here, show me why. Tell me, and we have a conversation. And then it shifts that conversation away from you dictating to them what they need to be doing, to them evaluating their performance, and you just being able to say, how can I support you? And that could be, that's going to change over time based on their goals in life, like you said. And that's what we'll kind of do that on a broader scale. Like annually, we'll have that. Like, hey, what's going on? What do you want to work on over the next year, over the next 6 months? And we build those into their plans then. But we've found that that's a much better way to kind of handle that management piece, because it gives more buy-in from them, and it allows you to be a supportive role, not a managerial, dictatorial role. And we've had to figure that out over time and kind of optimize it. It's not perfect now. We're always tweaking and, making that a little better, and it's never going to be perfect. Right. But I love the concept of it. Right. And I think it can be implemented in a lot of different ways. And it seems like it's a lot like, geez, I always get from people like, how do you meet with everybody monthly? And it's like, well, you do them quick. If they come prepared and they know, like, it's more of a conversation, and you get so much out of those as a leader. What's going on. That, like you said, you can talk to your 2 folks every day, and that their dog just died, or, they got a new puppy and it's keeping them up at night or whatever, Right. This allows you to do that in a structured format too.
Yeah, that's good stuff. There's so much there. To boil that down, what would be, and I think I'm selfishly asking this, but what would be one piece of advice that you would give for a scratch agent that maybe is looking to bring on their first team member? If you had to narrow all those good nuggets that you just said, what is that one piece of advice that you must do to have successful onboarding with your first team member?
Probably going to laugh based on your previous comment, but is open and clear expectations and communication. I mean, that's 100%. If you can have that with, especially your first team member or first handful of team members, I mean, you'll know what's going on. You'll know what incentivizes them, what they get out of bed for, what they don't, all those things. But you got to be willing to have those conversations. You got to be willing to ask. It's not enough to just walk by and be like, hey, how you doing? And then just keep walking, right? Like, you have to want, just like you said with your clients, you have to want to get to know them, build a relationship.
And let them talk. And let them talk. 100%. The open-ended, how can I help you?
Yeah.
And, it's funny. Yesterday I spoke to a group of local branch managers at a local bank here. There's about 18 of them, and it was me, a real estate agent, and a couple of their business owners, and we were just talking through different things. And like we talked about that communication with the client, and because on a banking side they're dealing with their tellers who have people coming angry because they've got their check bounced or whatever it is, and like being able to relate with them and having that conversation, it all goes to your team, to your client. It's the same type of communication. But that's all good stuff. I want to pivot here a little bit. Tell us about the podcast, man. It was a blast to be on as a guest. I think the name is amazing, Getting Past the Premium. Tell us the history of that, what you guys are doing with that, the goal of it, and a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, Getting Past the Premium, GPP, kind of came out of, I mentioned we've really shifted and evolved over time. And, our model is now, over the last 6 or 7 years, has shifted to much more of that risk advisory, risk management firm. And so our whole model is built around that. And we have this deep belief that, our industry really needs to make this shift too, right? We have to get past the just sling an insurance policy to make a commission because that's what the client asked for, right? Like, this is a super important piece of people's lives, their businesses. It's protecting what's most important to them. And if we don't do our job of getting to know them and understanding what they know and what they don't know about what they're buying and what maybe they have going on in their life that could impact what they're purchasing, all of those things, and it can go like much broader than that as well. We're not going to be doing the service that we need to for our clients. And so we've made that evolution and just realized like one of the biggest things we battle in our industry is changing the way clients think, right? And so we started the podcast to start that conversation in the industry and start saying, how can we, get past the premium, but how can we get past just selling the insurance policy and actually help our clients put them in a better position? And so my co-host Ryan Broad is in the financial services industry, and it's kind of like the financial services industry was in the 90s, right? Where it was sell a mutual fund, get a commission, right? And that was adverse incentives. And then, we have a financial crisis and all the laws change. And now a lot of that industry is subject to different laws where you have to be a fiduciary and, all of those things. And it's just, a lot of the concepts can apply to the insurance industry, right? And I know that there's a lot of us out there that act in that manner for our clients, but there's not enough. And, put on top of that, the save 15% in 15 minutes, and every commercial that you see in the Super Bowl and everything is all around save price, right?
Yep.
And that's just doing a disservice to our clients. It's training them inaccurately. And so we feel like we need this shift, and it's not going to happen until there's a bigger tidal wave of people like us having the right conversations to get the industry to shift that way.
What's very interesting about that is when you bring on new team members. I don't know if you've seen this, Elliot, but, especially ones that haven't had experience, one of the first things that kind of comes up is like, oh, okay, so like who's the cheapest carrier that we have? Yeah. Or like and it's like, whoa. And it's like, you got to train your staff 100%. on that, because people do not know. I mean, besides the commercials, I mean, Facebook, Instagram ads, you get freaking mailing from, I won't say the name of the carrier, that says, hey, we did a quote for you. We could save you $687. And I'm like, I never even talked to this person.
Yeah.
So I love the concept of the podcast you guys have. And I would honestly challenge any insurance agent. And I know this is kind of frowned upon, and some agents will say, there's too many insurance podcasts, but I would challenge you to start one, because the amount you're going to learn from starting a podcast is absolutely insane. And if that is all you get from the podcast is just learning from the guests that you have on the podcast, it more than pays for itself. And I could tell you, agree. Steven, I'm sure, can attest to it too. We've done 25 episodes roughly, and I feel like I've learned more than I have in the last few years just from the guests that we've had on, honestly. So I'm going to be messaging you after this to get a copy of that book, by the way.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. And I absolutely agree with that. And you get different perspectives on things. You're like, you talk to somebody, you're like, geez, never thought of doing it that way. And I don't know. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've gotten better as a person, as a business leader, as a insurance agent, all of the things that go into it just by having these conversations. And it's fun. Like, we would have never met had it not been for podcasting land. Yep. And
so true.
Yeah.
So how long you guys been doing that?
The podcast we started in 2020, I think. So 2 to 3 years.
Cool. That's a good amount of time.
Yeah, it's been, and we made the promise to ourselves we weren't even going to look at like metrics or how we were doing or anything until we got to like 100 episodes. So I don't even know where we're at this point, but we just keep it going. It's fun.
That's same with us. That same thing. And switching hats again. And I'm trying to figure out when you're sleeping at this point, but let's talk about launch. Tell us what it is. Admittedly, Shawn and I really don't know much about it. We've seen some stuff that you've shared on social and the project that you've created there. So, give us the elevator pitch on that and tell us what it's all about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just described like our philosophy, right? And so we have developed a sales process that walks our prospects and clients through that philosophy. And we were using a whole bunch of tech that didn't work very well for that process. So we just ended up building our own internally. It's called Launch, and it basically has digitized our sales process, which is an assessment-based process, right? We want to ask really good, consistent questions, have consistent answers. We have a scoring mechanism in there so you can tell the client, here's your benchmarking on this particular area for, we call it a risk profile, et cetera, et cetera. We build our client plans in there so we can show the client, like, here's your pain points, right, that you told me. Here's your score. Here's how we plan to solve those for you step by step. And then the system can also manage all the tasks and things in that client plan over the next year or further out or whatever. And so, going back to what I was just talking about, making this industry shift, we built that internally and realized that same thing, that like, geez, there's a lot of people out there that maybe have or want to have this type of a philosophy, but don't have the tools, just like we didn't have the tools to really implement and scale it. And so we decided to start to sell that to our competitors, frankly, and have been doing that for a year and a half now, and have gotten several firms that have jumped on and want to help us build it. And we're constantly making it better. And, it's been fun even on that end to get other agents' perspectives on, features and things in the product. And it continues to get better because of it. So we got some cool stuff we're working on now. We're looking at building in some of the GPT AI into it, where we can leverage a lot of that to help us, get more efficient at what we're doing in the system, help us give us insights into a client's risk profile, et cetera. So a lot of cool stuff that's happening there, and it's been a lot of fun. So whole different world, I will say.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, but I think that's maybe where the chat GPT comes into play, is because there's so many classes of business on the commercial side. Like, I just know from being a producer, the questions I ask to an electrician are going to be way different than the questions that I ask to a roofer compared to, somebody in the wholesale distributor space, So how do you guys have specific risk management questions for just certain classes, or what does that look like?
So they can be, yep. So you can do industry focused assessments and questions.
Gotcha.
But I would also challenge that a little bit in that, from an insurance perspective, absolutely different questions are asked, but we're not asking the insurance application questions. There's plenty of systems out there like WonderWrite, Indio, et cetera, that can gather insurance-based answers.
Yeah, the supplemental
not
stuff.
accord forms, right?
Yeah.
But what we're looking for is the behavioral-based and underlying risks that are driving insurance pricing, coverage, et cetera, right? Or could be health insurance, could be many other risk areas. So it's things like, on an Accord app, it asks, do you have a safety program? How many people have actually told you no? Like, it never happens, right? But we all know that there's a big discrepancy in safety programs out there and how they're actually driving a culture of working safely. Well, that's more important to the underwriting profile and to our submission to the carriers than, do you have a safety program? So that's the type of stuff that we're asking about. It's like, okay, tell me about your safety program. How often are you doing, weekly meetings? What content are you implementing? And so we've built these in, and then we score those because we have a consistent way that you can answer them. And we actually score those in. So it's very difficult. When we started this, we found it's very difficult to score those open-ended questions because everybody answers them a little differently. And so we came up with kind of a cool way to get consistent answers around those types of questions. And so we can apply a scoring algorithm to it and create consistency. And then we can benchmark with that client and say, here's where you're at today. If we do these things, we're anticipating you'll be here, and we want to see that score going up over the course of time, right? And so when you think about that from an industry perspective, a lot of, obviously there are different things in different industries, but a lot of those same core risks and concepts apply to many different types of industries, right?
Like fleet safety, return to work, and all that stuff.
Bingo.
Which, could affect the mod, which is when you could start to show kind of the graphs on this is where you could be if you follow all these risk management strategies.
Yeah, it's huge for blue collar industries and all of those that do actually have a lot more control over pricing and coverage because they can, control their claims and control the underlying risk management program that they're using.
Yeah, and most don't know that.
Correct.
So is it just agent focus? Is it just agent facing? Is it client facing as well? Do they have like a portal to see their score? Is that how or is it just, hey, based on this report that we ran, here's your risk assessment score, and these are the things that we're suggesting you do?
Yeah, more around that. We don't have a client-facing portal yet, but it's been something that we've talked quite a bit about. But the system it has your score, and then it has a couple different like reports that you can, provide and print out and put into your client proposal. So
it's almost like running like a mod analysis, but from a risk management strategy.
Yeah. So now does it? I'm trying to think of does it? Would this be helpful for maybe someone looking to go more commercial that doesn't know those right things to ask? Or like Shawn said, you have a million different questions depending on the class codes, and you get back to the office and like, oh, I need to ask all these questions, and I didn't ask them when I met with contractor A or whatever. Is that, I know it's more risk focused, not question focused, but is that still something that you are positioning towards? Or
yeah, so I mean, we found that some of the people that are having the biggest success are those that are, smaller firms or maybe are personal lines looking to go to commercial, because it can help. It helps you create that consistent process day one, right? You don't have to recreate the whole thing. We went through 3 or 4 years of building it all, right, and then got fed up and built the system. And so, I mean, you could literally sign up for launch, go out the next day and read 25 questions and have your score and everything for that client and have the reports and all of it. Now, we recommend a lot of other training between then and when you're going out in front of a client, but that's how it's set up. You absolutely could do that. And then you can also customize it so you can add your own questions in, you can change how you want to ask things, et cetera, and still do all the scoring and everything like that.
Elliot, I'm curious, is there a premium, I don't want to say threshold, but is there a certain spot where you're like, hey, if it's $1,200 in premium, it's probably not worth asking the 25 behavioral questions. Is there kind of something you explain to your producers, like, hey, if it's generating more than, I'm making up a number, 10,000 in revenue, this is where you want to implement these, additional questions, or do you just have it run on everybody?
So that's a good question. We're probably a little bit differently actually than we're seeing other firms out there using it. Other firms are very much like, hey, if it doesn't generate pretty high revenue, we're not going to go through this process.
Gotcha.
So our more belief is in the psychographic profile of the client. And so we require it to be done on anything that is $5,000 in revenue and up, but we really want it done on anybody that is what is we call within our target market. We have 5 other parameters that can determine our target market. And a lot of those are just around that psychographic profile, like privately held, do they want an advisory relationship, like et cetera, et cetera.
Gotcha.
That could be a $2,500 account, but we still want to start them out understanding that this is the process we go through, and we're going to do this on a regular basis, because we've learned over time, the minute we shortcut that process and we just write the insurance for somebody, we are now the insurance agent. We're not the risk advisor. And it's way too hard to shift backwards, because now they think it's a sales tactic or something to get more business or whatever. They really need to understand how we work from the start and go through this process, because then they view us as a partner and a risk advisor.
And to your point, what a great leg up for scratch agents that may be looking to do this and set the foundation now, right? Last week we talked to David Watson, a risk advisor, about that, about using these tools to set the foundation. This is the way that we do it, so that when you hire that 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th person, you're not turning that ship around in different senses, setting the foundation, setting the processes. So appreciate you sharing that, Elliot, because I think it's a really good tool that could benefit people looking to go that direction. As we look to wrap this up, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate you jumping on with us here. If people want to learn more about Launch, maybe just want to pick your brain about something we talked about, connect with you, what's the best way for people to reach out and get in touch?
Yeah, you can go to the website for Launch. It's just getlaunch.io. Getlaunch.io. And there's even a get a demo thing on there that you can see 3 pre-recorded demos. You don't even have to go through a live demo or anything. Cool. But you can also get a hold of me at E as in Elliot Bassett, Bassett at mylaunch.io.
Cool. Now, Elliot, we asked this question to scratch agents that come on, but I still think it applies to you and what you're doing there. If you were to wake up tomorrow morning and have to start a scratch agency from zero, just you got to start over just from zero tomorrow morning. What's one thing you would focus on or one thing that you would do differently?
That is a good question. I'm going to do differently, and I would focus on branding and marketing from the start, which we didn't get into a lot today.
No, we didn't get into it, but I talked about that group of bankers that I talked to yesterday, and they asked me what my goal is with T5, and I responded that I want to be a marketing company that sells insurance. Mm-hmm. Right, creating that fear of missing out and creating that experience, and so I appreciate you saying that.
I think it's a differentiator. Experience, what you just said, I think is a differentiator. Our industry is going with technology way more to buy online. No experience. It's, crap experience in most cases. But I say that too because do it from the start. Be intentional with your brand and your marketing because it takes time. But you lay a good foundation and it'll build and build and build and build and build. You don't want to reverse engineer it down the road.
Love it. What a great way to wrap up. Shawn, you got anything else before we wrap up here?
That's it, Elliot. It was awesome to finally meet you, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you down the road. I'm going to shoot you a message after this, all right?
Perfect. Sounds
all
good,
right,
guys.
everybody. That's another episode of the Scratch Agency Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Do us a favor. Like the show, share the show, and subscribe. Most importantly, remember to dig down deep, believe in yourself, and own your own future. We'll see you next week. Take care.